For 15 years, my world was measured in milligrams of heart medication, the hum of an oxygen concentrator, and the four walls of my father's bedroom. My name is Christian. When I was 25, a vibrant young civil engineer with a promising future, my father suffered a catastrophic stroke that left him entirely paralyzed from the waist down. My older brother, Julian, was already establishing his luxury real estate firm in the capital. When the diagnosis came, Julian stood in the hospital hallway, checked his gold watch, and said, "Christian, someone has to manage the family's broader image, and my business is at a critical juncture. You stay here and handle Dad. I'll send money when I can." Julian left the next morning, and the financial help he promised materialized only as a few irregular checks during the first year, before stopping entirely. I gave up my engineering career, my apartment, and eventually the woman I loved, because I could never leave the house for more than 2 hours at a time. For a decade and a half, my life was a relentless cycle of physical and emotional exhaustion. Yet, whenever my father had a lucid moment, he would squeeze my hand with his weak, trembling fingers and whisper, "You are my true son, Christian. Everything this family has, this house, my legacy, it belongs to you." Julian, meanwhile, became a multimillionaire. His social media was a gallery of high-end sports cars and Swiss ski vacations. When I called him because Dad was in the ICU with severe pneumonia, Julian answered from a yacht in Monaco, sounding annoyed. "Christian, if he's not dead, don't call me. The doctors know what to do." On a freezing winter morning, my father's long battle finally came to an end. He passed away peacefully in his sleep. I sat by his breathless body for hours, weeping not just for his loss, but for the sudden, terrifying emptiness of my own stolen youth. I was 40 years old, with an empty bank account and zero career history. The funeral was a small, quiet affair. Julian arrived 30 minutes late, driving a brand new luxury SUV, and spent the entire service texting on his phone at the back of the chapel. The very next morning, at precisely 8 a.m., the roar of an engine woke me. I opened the front door to find Julian standing on the porch, with 3 sharply dressed corporate attorneys and a moving van. "Julian, what is this?" I asked, my voice raspy from crying. "Business, Christian," Julian said, stepping past me without asking. "Dad is gone. It's time to liquidate the estate. This is my home. Dad promised me this house for taking care of him." Julian let out a cold, mocking laugh, gesturing to his lead attorney, who pulled a thick document from his briefcase. "Your father might have said a lot of things, Christian," Julian sneered, "but 25 years ago, Grandfather set up a strict corporate family trust. Because I am the firstborn son and the managing partner of the family's Legacy LLC, the ownership of this entire property and all of Dad's accounts transfer exclusively to me. You have no legal standing here. You are essentially a squatter. I slaved away for 15 years, Julian. You didn't pay a single medical bill." "That was your choice," Julian replied with terrifying indifference. "You have exactly 2 hours to pack your clothes into a suitcase and vacate the premises. If you are still here at noon, the sheriff will remove you." With trembling hands, I packed 15 years of my life into a single suitcase. As I walked down the driveway in the freezing rain, Julian stood on the balcony, pouring a glass of vintage whiskey and laughing with his lawyers. I was forced to rent a tiny, damp basement apartment, taking a low-wage job as an entry-level clerk just to buy groceries. The psychological trauma was paralyzing. Every night, I woke up thinking I heard my father's medical monitors buzzing, only to realize I was alone in the dark, stripped of my dignity and my past. Julian, meanwhile, used the liquidation of our grandfather's estate to fund his most ambitious project yet. A massive, multi-million-dollar luxury residential high-rise called the Julian Tower. For 2 years, Julian and his glamorous fiancée, a high society influencer named Vanessa, flaunted their stolen wealth. They bought a sprawling glass penthouse, hosting lavish parties where they openly joked about how Julian had cleansed the family portfolio of dead weight. But an empire built on the ultimate backstab carries a heavy, toxic curse. A senior accountant at Julian's firm, disgusted by his ruthless business tactics, quietly handed over 2 decades of financial records to the federal tax authorities. Because Julian had used the complex family trust structure, the very same weapon he used to evict me, to hide massive corporate fraud and offshore tax evasion. The federal investigation was swift and devastating. One bright Thursday morning, federal agents and state police marched into Julian's corporate headquarters. Julian was arrested on live television, forced out of his glittering tower in handcuffs, his face pale with shock. The legal system he so deeply loved to weaponize turned against him with absolute fury. The court immediately froze every single asset tied to Julian's name and his company. The luxury cars, the Swiss accounts, the glass penthouse, everything vanished overnight. Vanessa didn't waste a single day. The moment the asset freeze took effect, she cleared out their remaining hidden safe of cash, packed her designer bags, and left the country, leaving Julian entirely alone to face the storm. Unable to post his multi-million-dollar bail, Julian spent 14 months inside a grim state holding facility while his trial dragged on. The extreme stress broke his body completely, and he began suffering from advanced, chronic kidney failure. Julian was found guilty on all counts of grand larceny and racketeering. The judge ordered the total liquidation of his remaining properties to pay back the millions in stolen federal loans. 2 years after he threw me out, the final auction of the family estate took place. What Julian didn't know was that during my 2 years in that basement apartment, my clerk job had connected me with an old engineering mentor. Together, we launched a highly successful independent consulting firm. I had spent every waking hour working, saving, and waiting for the scales to balance. I bought our grandfather's house back for a fraction of its value. It was a stormy, freezing evening when I stood on the porch of the fully restored colonial home. The rain was pouring down in heavy, blinding sheets, mimicking the exact day I had been eviction. Suddenly, a frail, ghostly figure shuffled up the long driveway on foot. It was Julian. He looked 60. His tailored suits were replaced by a cheap, damp coat. His face was gaunt from kidney failure, and his hands were trembling uncontrollably. He had been released early due to medical compassion laws, left with absolute zero to his name. He stood in the pouring rain, looking up at me with desperate, tearful eyes. "Christian," Julian rasped, his voice cracking against the wind. "Please. I have nowhere else to go. Vanessa took everything. I'm sick, Christian. I need a place to stay. We're brothers. Please." I looked down at the man who had called me a squatter, the man who had laughed while my father's equipment was thrown into a dumpster. I felt no rage, only stone. I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out the old, tarnished silver house key he had forced me to surrender 2 years ago. I walked to the edge of the porch and dropped the key into the freezing mud, right at his trembling, wet feet. "You always told me that law beats promises, Julian," I said, my voice completely calm. "The law says this house is mine. You chose to lock yourself out of this family 15 years ago. I gave Dad my youth. I have nothing left to give you." Julian fell to his knees in the mud, sobbing hysterically as he grabbed the key. "Christian, please, have mercy." "Mercy is a family value, Julian," I whispered, stepping back into the warm, bright hallway. "And you told me family was just dead weight." I closed the heavy oak door, turned the deadbolt with a solid, defining click, and walked back into the warmth, leaving the traitor alone in the dark storm to pay his debt to karma in full.